the most important influences in your life in hindsight are people that have randomly come into your life through relative coincidence. The old adage, it's a lot easier to keep a customer than it is to get a new one. A lot cheaper to keep them as well. What would have taken an analyst 2-3 days, the right ChatGPT prompts can get you well on the way. This is a world that I'm leaving behind, and how in this small window of opportunity that I have, how can I shape the world to be as good as it could possibly be for my kids? It's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Some things will stick, most of it will flake off, and then you just focus on what sticks.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. I just have a favor to ask before we begin. If you've been enjoying these conversations and want more stories that redefine success, please do us a massive favor and hit the subscribe button over on our YouTube channel. It literally takes 2 seconds to do and is completely free. It's a small gesture, but it makes a massive difference for us as it really helps us to grow the show. And with that, let's get into the episode. All right, welcome back to the Quest for Success podcast, and thanks for tuning in once again. For those who are tuning in on video, you'll notice that Jam's not with us today. Unfortunately, he had to buzz off to Sri Lanka, but the show must go on. And so I was thinking, who's someone who I know fairly well, but I'd want to know a bit more about their story and kind of, dive a bit deeper. And so that's why today we've got with us Dr. Dorian von Freyhold. We work together, and he seems to have endless amounts of stories, and a man I've got a lot of respect for. So, Dorian, thanks for sitting down with me today.
It's a pleasure. Obviously, Dylan has run our candidates, so I was the closest guy.
Not at all. Not at all. So, Dorian, this podcast is all about success. And so we need to start something pretty fundamental. And that is, what does success mean to you?
Oh, that's an interesting one. And I sort of, every time I see a shooting star and I'm sort of faced with the challenge of making a wish, ever since I was a little kid, I always made the same wish.
Yeah.
And that wish has been that I'm happy. For me, happiness is success.
Yeah.
Some might say money makes life easier. And I'm sure it does, and I think it's an ingredient. Career, I think, is important. Purpose in life is important. Family, very important. But the mix of all of those and getting that right, I think that's where happiness lies.
And I suppose for our listeners who don't know you, what's the kind of introduction to Dorian? What's the kind of one-liner to who Dorian is?
That question always scares me because I've always had a short attention span and have always done a lot of random things.
Yeah.
I at least see that there's a bit of a method to the madness. And I can give you a bit of an overview of, quick life story.
Yeah.
Might be helpful. Is that?
Yeah, let's just dive into your story, and then at the end we'll kind of have a bit more of a holistic understanding.
Yeah,
So I
good.
suppose for us to kind of understand how you got to where you are today, we need to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
So can you take us through your early childhood? I want to understand how you were shaped, kind of how your parents influenced your values, and kind of you growing up.
That's a long way back. I guess important to note here. I had a pretty international childhood, and broadly early childhood was between Australia and Germany, and then later the UK. Obviously expat parents. It sort of does that to people, but broadly, if I think of what shaped me as a child, I was initially spent the first 6 years of my life on a little hobby farm.
All right.
Which was, in hindsight, just the biggest gift to have as a child. I mean, I'd wake up in the morning and my sister and I would go and light a little fire and diddle around in the garden, and these sort of things that were just natural to us. Climb a mulberry tree, come out purple, were just our world, right? Go and play with the neighbors' kids. It's only now that I have children myself and we live in the city where I realize that was really quite idyllic.
Yeah.
kind of childhood. And that changed pretty abruptly when I was 6 years old, and we moved to Germany and to Cologne, so central Germany. It was straight into a big city.
Yeah.
Kindergarten and year one there. I sort of have memories of cold winters and trudging off to school and my little yellow bicycle, which I was deeply in love with, and good times. And I came back to Australia in year two, and then that sort of rhythm though of between the continents was something that continued. Most of my high school years were back in Germany, which I really enjoyed. I think just being a young man growing up on a small island called Australia, or distant island called Australia, would have been a different life for me.
Definitely.
But it was very enriching to have both worlds, have the calm and quiet and safety of Australia, but then at the same time the excitement of Europe. And so I finished school in Germany, then still had to do military service. So that was about a year of my life in a helicopter battalion.
Oh, wow.
And then studied engineering and business in Germany and the UK. Loved that experience. Came out the other end pretty sure I didn't want to be an engineer. Um, but it left me with an inability to spell and tell lies. Um, the I guess the draw of coming back to Australia was pretty strong at that time. It was mid GFC. I came out of my studies thinking, okay, do I want to start a career here in Europe, and I might not make it back out again? And I remember sitting there with an offer letter from Ernst and Young, thinking, is this going to be me, or is going back to a home that sort of childhood memories
Yeah.
going to me? And I made the choice to come back to Australia, and never regretted it, I should say. Worked as a consultant for a year, enjoyed that, but always had a bit of the desire to do a PhD, and figured I don't want to be an old man doing that.
Yeah.
So I put a few proposals out there. Ended up being rather randomly taken by a top professor at the University of Queensland in 2012, whose discipline I didn't know what I was getting myself into was consumer psychology. So that's sort of the place where statistics meets the business world with an influence of psychology. And he liked me because I was good with numbers.
And wait, so did you just fall into that? Like, you were just putting kind of
I pretty
feelers
much
out?
fell into it. Yeah, it was a funny story. I had a good friend who was applying as well at that time. And we were actually work colleagues. He had just finished his degree in psychology. And I found what he was doing fascinating, far more interesting than my stuff. And he lived up in the Blue Mountains, and we were having a conversation broadly about what are cool topics, because we had to
Yeah.
write this proposal, to then send to the universities. And I was kind of fascinated by the topic of why do startups fail, and I wanted to have a look at the sort of dark side
Nice.
of startups.
Yeah.
Plenty of articles that basically say there's a reason why most founders live in their mum's basement and don't make it out. So I was really keen on doing an in-depth statistical analysis of why that is.
Yeah.
So I wrote this cute little paper, which was broadly around having a look at startup failure as a function of networks and network externalities and critical momentum. And that professor, he I think read my paper, thought that's fascinating. However, that was the last I ever heard of that topic. So, so he took me on. Must have been sufficiently intrigued.
Steered you into a different direction.
Steered me into a different direction. Yeah, he was US trained, and they're typically the course for a PhD is 5 years. 2 years of that coursework.
Yeah.
Hardcore coursework. And I think he saw me as clever enough but undercooked. So he put me into every statistics an econometrics course that he could find on campus, which was horrendous. Only in hindsight did he once admit to me that he didn't think I'd make it. He kind of thought, I'm surprised you stuck around. I was torturing you, and it was torturous.
Yeah.
While the other PhD students were frolicking around and having fun, I was actually quarantined in his office for 2 years.
Wow. Yeah. Grinding away.
Grinding away, which was great in hindsight.
Yeah.
So broadly, that was then the next 4 years of my life, completing the PhD, and the topic there became one of the discovery of how the big five personality traits. So there's general consensus that personalities fall into 5 traits, and we're all somewhere on the spectrum on all of those traits. One of those traits that's really important is openness to experience. And kind of pretty easy hypothesis initially, the higher somebody is in openness to experience, the more likely they are to adopt innovations. So I did get to keep a little bit of the startup feel, right? However, the question then was, how do we, not to be cynical, manipulate people who are low in openness to experience to be more open, right? So you're trying to bridge that gap between initial adoption of an innovation to how do I get the masses, right? You're kind of on that hump, and how can you do that through psychology? And there's some
Cross the chasm,
and there's some really cool kind of mechanisms that broadly tap into construal level theory, and how you can shift people's time horizons. And it did work. A lot of that was using people as guinea pigs and experimenting and running the stats on it, which I really enjoyed. We did a lot of consumer panel work, a lot of field studies, so that was that was a great chapter of my life. I really enjoyed it. University of Queensland, probably the most beautiful campus in the world. We got to the end of that, and actually, I hadn't finished yet. A colleague in the business school, then an academic, got cancer, and so they were kind of thinking about what's a stopgap solution, and they had this weird, colourful PhD student floating around who wasn't quite finished, but for some reason was on the short list for a lecturing position. And so I was given basically her position initially.
Oh, wow.
I remember the conversation was, Dorian, could you lecture 1 or 2 courses? I said, yeah, sure. They said, would you like a lecturing position instead? Otherwise it'll get too expensive. And I thought, okay, what am I buying? I think I was 1 year out from finishing. And so I fell into lecturing at that stage and enjoyed that. I really hated the marking. I really loved the students. And I did that for about 2 years. During that time, I guess I'd quickly recognized at the end of my undergrad, I didn't want to be an engineer. And I quickly recognized at the end of my PhD, I didn't want to be a career academic. But I really, and I still feel that there's a lot of research conducted at universities which never makes it into the real world. And that's probably an even more unique Australian problem. In the US, there's alumni programs, a lot of industry engagement. You get a lot of that in Europe as well. Australia, there seem to be 2 silos. And so part of my kind of provocative posture in the business school was one of, we should get more industry speakers in. And then the next step was, we should start doing free consulting projects for partners of the university and build essentially a bit of an alumni program. And I was just always surprised at the uptake. I could pretty much call any top exec, or as many as there are in Brisbane, but I could call any of them and say, hey, you'd be prepared to come on campus and give a lecturer a guest lecture here? And they were all more than happy to, and I'd take them out for lunch afterwards. And it was just a really great experience for the students. Quite a few of them got internships and later jobs through
Wow.
bit of contact. So really rewarding. And this sort of extension of that, and there was a bit of a push internally at the time as well, was to engage in a consulting capacity with industry. And so myself and a colleague started doing that more intensely. We were sort of the one-eyed amongst the blind.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, more or less out of the blue, we got a introduction to the then CEO of the Australian newspaper, so part of News
Oh, cool.
Corp.
Yeah.
And he said, "Look, I've had a conversation with a guy in private equity, and I understand that you're doing the kind of research that I'm interested in."
Yeah.
And we had positioned ourselves broadly as people that were optimizing pricing. So
And was this in like an offshoot? Was this like your own startup at this point?
it wasn't at that stage.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
quickly kind of scrambled, set up
Formalize it a bit. Yeah.
set up a company. Um, but broadly, my colleague had a very strong background in a discipline called choice modeling, and choice modeling essentially aims to elicit the utility that people derive out of certain features of a product, and price is obviously one of those. And what you're able to do with choice modeling is, at the end of a large experiment, model the price curve. So you can have a look, where is current pricing, which in many cases in Australia is below the optimal price. So you could actually push up price without sacrificing much demand until you get to the revenue optimizing price.
Yeah.
And beyond that, there be dragons.
Yeah.
So you need to figure out by how much can you increase that price. And we were also doing some competitive mapping, but at that stage, mainly pricing. And we somehow managed to convince that CEO that we were the right people for the job, and conducted our work there. And the joke still remains. And I remember him sort of chuckling about it. He said, "Oh, we did this little pilot in New South Wales with your new pricing schema, and just a 2-week pilot with 0.5% of our subscribership." And he sort of looked at us and he went, "The project's already paid for itself."
You're in.
That's right. That's right. And the next client of ours was KFC, and did
Oh, wow.
similar stuff. And they joked that the project was paid for itself before lunch, which was even more insulting. And so we rolled from there, but it turned out that
You needed to do your pricing analysis on your own
That's
product, on your own service.
still haven't got that right. So it turned out to be an interesting entry into that market. And of course, once you're in these large organizations as a data guy, they come to you with other problems. And we sort of rolled through the large corporates, and then also just by virtue of essentially ability to improve profits and revenues for companies, ended up with private equity firms who wanted to either assess whether companies they're thinking of buying can increase their prices, and in the first 100 days of ownership, they can look sensational because they've significantly increased revenue, and pricing still remains the most powerful profit lever you have. Or on the other hand, look at portfolio companies where they'd like to optimize. And so we've done work across Australia's largest private equity firms, run from PEP, Quadrant, Partners Group, Adamantum, you name it, looking at everything from childcare centres, gyms, horse food, burgers. So that's been a fascinating journey. And I guess now sort of the next chapter has been eating our own lunch to an extent. So myself and my business partner Marcus and Dylan, you're part of this journey as well. Have set up a small private equity fund where we're looking at the small end of town for exciting for us deals, boring for others, in that we're looking at companies that just have steady cash flows and operate in industries that most people would not know of or aren't interested in.
100%. Well, there's so much to unpack there, but I suppose when you were kind of setting up your own kind of business and you were getting those clients in, where did those relationships come from? Like you mentioned, the Australian KFC, like these are some big companies. How did you manage to prove to them that, or get that introduction and prove your value there?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and yeah, in hindsight, probably one of the most important components of actually making it
Yeah,
to where I am now. So I guess sort of rewinding a tad. I mean, I'd been out of Australia for 10 years. Um, I came back. I hadn't studied here initially. I didn't know anyone. I mean, so
yeah,
I'm not a guy who's come from the in crowd and
yeah,
has just you know, followed on from daddy's contacts.
yeah,
So I was a new guy in the country. It was home. I was always an Australian abroad as well, but
yeah,
I was um, yeah, I guess yeah. Just to make the general point, I started at zero from
yeah,
a contact
yeah,
space. I guess the credibility through going to an institution like the University of Queensland, which does have very good national international standing, was a springboard,
yeah,
and uh, you know, by virtue of studying at that university and getting a couple of acronyms behind my name from that university, I at least didn't have to prove that I
yeah.
have a brain.
That's true. Yeah,
Um, so that helped, but that's only a catalyst. And I guess sort of far more importantly, um, I lucked out in the people that I met along the way. I mean, I have to say I was very lucky to meet the professor that I did.
yeah,
He didn't open many doors, but he sure trained me hard, and I've
yeah,
still got whip marks. Uh, but that stuck with me.
yeah,
I didn't forget those lessons. Then my colleague, who I started the consultancy with, and I was just a junior academic. He was a senior academic. I floated on his credibility and rode his coattail,
yeah,
no doubt about that. And then I guess as we got traction, um, in particular, one individual in the private equity world, founder of one of Australia's leading ones, we became rather close, and he acted as a patron in many ways, and that has still kind of baffles me how I ended up in that
yeah,
situation. But I think. Uh, at some stage decided that he liked the cut of my jib, or at least could tolerate it, and he opened a lot of doors for
yeah,
me. Um, so I guess what I'm saying is, uh, you can do your own, you can study, you can do your very best at university. That may or may not open doors. I've also seen plenty of folks who don't make it past go
yeah,
despite the best of grades. I've also seen many who, despite terrible grades, have done just
yeah,
fine.
yeah,
Um, but then it really comes down to the people you meet along the way. And I've always had a bit of an attitude of you jump at opportunities.
definitely.
A good friend of mine, Gareth. I remember we were walking down the street. And he said, "Dorian, if a van pulled up right beside us here, and a guy popped his head out and said, 'Hey, would you be up for an adventure?'" Uh, and I said, "Well, oh, what's the adventure?" And the guy says, "Look, it's gonna be fun, but I don't know what the
The
adventure is. I can't
surprise.
tell you.
Yeah,
It's a secret.
yeah,
Would you jump in?" And I've always been the kind of guy, yeah, yeah, okay, I'm up for it.
yeah,
You know.
100%.
So the plenty of the, and I guess in hindsight, looking at my journey, and I'm 40 now, so I'm not a young player anymore. But plenty of the opportunities and doors that have opened along the way were because I had that attitude of jumping into that van and
Yeah.
wanting a bit of adventure.
Yeah, you got to
Uh,
put yourself in the situations to get those opportunities, but then you've also got to take those opportunities with both hands and run with them as
and
well.
sometimes you land in some pretty funny vans as well.
And I suppose like one part of kind of this how you got to where you are today is relationships. You touched on it, and it's something that I definitely admire about you is how you go about maintaining and creating new relationships. Like we'll walk around the office or we'll be walking around the street, and Dorian will just bump into people that he knows, and uh, it's fascinating, and it's something that I'd love to be one day. What's kind of your your secret sauce to building and maintaining strong relationships?
I enjoy people, and that's probably one important prerequisite.
Yeah.
If you don't like people, faking it gets old. I enjoy people. Uh, I find people's stories very interesting, much like you as
Yeah.
well. So I'll often listen. I mean, I've had some sensational chats with Uber drivers, and so
Yeah.
and I'm not a shy guy, so I'll happily do that. But um, I try to help. I'm generous with my time.
Yeah.
And if I can see an opportunity where somebody's struggling, I'll jump in and I'll be the first one to roll up my sleeves and give it a crack and see whether I can get them out of
Yeah.
the situation they're in. And yeah, as to the people one bumps into on the street, you stick around for long enough, you'll meet a fair few people. So it's also one of being in the same place for a
Yeah.
while. And as a guy who went to many different schools, I know what it feels like to be the new kid at school. And there's no friend like the guy who comes after you at school, and you're sort of like an old guy by then.
Yeah.
But I've always maintained that openness and I guess sort of empathy for people that are trying to find their way into a new network and trying to figure out, which side is up and look for somebody who will talk to them. In plenty of places, you have an in crowd and they don't really talk to you because their social slots are already occupied.
Yeah.
Independent of how my social slots are, I'm always more than happy to have a chat with a new guy, and often enough, that's where the opportunities lie. Figuring out what they're trying to do and what they're up to, and I've found uh, many of the friendships I've forged, they were fellow travelers in a way
Yeah.
that were trying to figure out, new new person in a new place, trying to figure out which way's up and how to get a foothold. So not to say that I don't talk to people who aren't new. Yeah, that's the other one. Relationships in many ways are compounding. So
Definitely.
much like interest in the bank, and again, that's where it's important to be persistent, stick around, and be that guy for that purpose. So that you can also meet other people along the way. I mean, I've never been a guy who's gone to many networking events, and to be honest, I kind of avoid them if I can. So I don't put myself
Yeah.
out there, but
It's the organic
it's the
relationship.
organic
Yeah.
relationships, and also as you do business with people, often enough you meet some fascinating people along that journey as well.
And you
Whether
build
it's former
reputation as
clients,
well.
and yeah,
Whereas like people in your network will go, oh, I met this guy today. I think he'd be really good to speak with Dorian, and they probably introduce you. And so you get that kind of exponential network effects.
Absolutely, and they sort of broadly have to feel that that person who they're introducing somebody to is not going to leave a bad
Yeah,
impression.
yeah.
No, yeah, that's important. Sometimes I've been in the sensational position where some people uh, have kind of used me or what I do as a talking point, and then I ended up being on the receiving end of plenty of networking
Yeah.
opportunities through that, which has been great. At the same time, whenever I look at a problem, and I enjoy problems, and that's a persistent theme, I enjoy a good
Yeah.
sort of nut to crack. I always try to think about, who would know about this, who can I pull into this. I often still pull experts in from different areas, and generously, well, whether it's generous or not, but I'm helping myself in a way, but pull in the best people I can find to projects,
Yeah.
because then the client experience is going to be better as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and that's it's never a deliberate attempt on my behalf to build a network,
Yeah.
which again I always find a bit creepy, sort of the guys that hover in a crowd and sort of move strategically from one person to the
Yeah.
next. And I've always been the guy who sort of find some quirky guy at the back of the room and has a chat for half an hour.
Yeah.
And really enjoys the weird and wonderful stories that they tell, So
It's all about just like having that first conversation. And if the, person's not right for you, then that's all right. But at least you know. Like,
Yeah.
but if you never have those conversations, you never know, right? And I feel like it's a dying art at the moment. People
Oh,
are so scared to talk to other people that you meet on the street or in the Uber or whatever.
absolutely, absolutely. And then sometimes there's the wonderful situation where you don't even have to do the work. You know,
Yeah.
somebody else comes and you're the quirky, colourful guy in the back of the room that
Yeah.
they have a chat to, or
Yeah.
there's been a friendly intro. And again, I've found that some of the best relationships I've developed were through introductions.
Mm.
I think that people have just already dropped their guard a bit if they're introduced through somebody they respect,
Yeah.
and it's you've already passed the first hurdle
Yeah.
in many ways. And it's the same for me if I'm to meet somebody um, who's been introduced through somebody who I trust, admire. Of course, I'm
Yeah.
going to
It's credibility there.
try to do my very
Mm.
best to open doors.
And you mentioned there kind of how your upbringing in multiple different locations has kind of, shaped how you kind of live your life now, being never kind of being at home, kind of always moving around. I want to understand, what impact that's had on you, but also the times where you weren't focused on, let's say, work, like your military experience. I know you did some time as a lumberjack as
Oh,
well. Like, how important do you think those periods where you're not really focused on, let's say, career progression were to who you are now?
yeah, yeah. I guess part one of that question, how has moving around
Yeah.
shaped me? Um, it's a great one, right? I mean, I remember I had a girlfriend for a while who was a psychologist, and she ran every battery past me and came to the conclusion that I'm rather vanilla. So, so I think I'm all right. I think I got through it all without too many blemishes. I guess you develop a degree of plasticity.
Mm.
And I grew up with two languages, English and German, so I can switch between the two very fluently.
Yeah.
Would have made a great spy, other than being 6'7". So no,
No hiding in the
world's
back
worst
corner.
hide and seek player. Um, and that sort of sets you up. And I think especially if you're bilingual, you have this beautiful situation where you can blend into a foreign
Yeah.
place seamlessly, and they don't pick it. Yeah, especially if you're. And for me, it was being an Australian in Germany without an accent. They wouldn't know until I sort of said, "Hey, I'm not from here." Um, the I think what probably had quite a profound impact was changing schools a fair
Yeah.
amount and the to and fro, which on the one hand, I think I was fortunate in that I have a high openness to experience. I
Mm.
enjoy
Yeah.
people. Um, I um, I I always kind of appreciated the nuances of different countries I was in, enjoyed the new friends. Um, at the same time, you leave a lot of friends behind,
Yeah.
and that's probably one of those sort of shaping things that um, in hindsight, I'd say that it's left me with an ability to quickly mingle and find my way in new social settings.
Yeah.
With the downside of if I move on, I set up a new kind of identity
Yeah.
and you roll on,
Yeah.
right? So it's always balancing that one a little
Yeah.
bit. I think every expat kid has that a little bit. They sort of become a bit of a shapeshifter,
Yeah.
uh, a bit of a chameleon,
Yeah. Yeah.
and especially that sort of um, those first few weeks at a new school. I mean, let's face it, you're at the bottom of the pecking order, and you have to work your way up.
Yeah.
They don't know what kind of person you are. They've often got long friendships, known people
Yeah.
since the sandpit, and
Who's
here
the
is
new
that new
guy?
guy.
Yeah.
What's he all about?
Yeah.
Um, so that's an interesting one. On the other hand, just the richness of my own personal experience through
Mm.
having exposure, on the one hand, to Australia and all its beauty, and then also Europe, and as a young man growing up in Europe, being able to jump on a plane and
Yeah.
be in France or Spain or Italy for a weekend, or I remember the uni holidays would come around and you'd have some mates in Marbella or
Yeah.
Granada, and you'll jump onto a plane and stay with them and have an absolutely great time. And the seasons, even seasons, things like I love a nice autumn. I love a
Yeah.
nice spring. Even a couple of days of winter are fine. But no, I love that. I love
Yeah.
the full experience, and it's something that I've sought to recreate in my professional life as well. So bringing together Australia with Europe.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, so so that's part one, right?
Yeah.
Now part two was more on the sort of how do these, you know, I guess semi-unpaid or lowly paid experiences influenced my life. Look, I think they were super important. You mentioned the lumberjack experience. That was probably, other than a little bit of lawn mowing as a kid and putting pamphlets into letterboxes, all of which were rather short-lived. Yeah, the lumberjack thing was fantastic. So I was in the Harz Mountains. I remember I started out as a 15-year-old boy in the summer holidays, and I was super skinny, little twig of a guy. They probably saw me and thought, is he going to
We're
be
gonna
able to
shape
get?
him into a man.
Yeah, well, the Harz Mountains are, they're steep, they're rugged, there's snow, it's lots of pine plantations. And, would literally just day after day, have a jerry can of fuel in one hand, that's about 20 kilos, and a big chainsaw in the other. And you'll just be heading up the mountains to um, cut down some trees. And that was, as a young guy, just sensational.
Yeah.
And here were a whole bunch of older guys. They had cars and stuff,
Yeah.
children. So, there was a big hairy men. And I kind of admired some of them. They were real guys. And they sort of, on the one hand, there was a degree of initiation. Here's this young fella. On the other hand, it was really important to um, kind of go through the experience of what hard physical
Yeah.
labor is.
Yeah.
So I went from a sort of skinny 15-year-old. At 16, I was 6'7". I think I weighed something like 75 kilos or something.
What?
I was skinny. And then I'd always go there for my summer holidays and do that. And then by the time I was 17, I was uh, 95 kilos and quite the physical transformation.
Yeah.
And much of that was, I mean, it was just hard work.
Yeah.
But great to mingle with, essentially, hard-working guys who showed me the ropes, and I sort of always look at that experience. You're freezing in winter, your hands are numb, you've got sawdust all through your face. Um, you've got another 3-4 hours of work until you can finally have a bit of lunch. And it's character building. It really, really is. So yeah, that one is a kind of key experience that I still relish.
Yeah.
Every time I see a chainsaw, something still rejoices in me. That's a smell of two-stroke fuel and
The inner mountain man comes out.
that's right. A little bit of but yeah, I mean, then the military was great. And in Germany, the schooling system is one of streaming. So I was here for primary school, just in a small public school,
Yeah.
nothing special. Then went over to Germany, and I think somewhat fortunately ended up in the highest stream. So in year 5, they essentially start the assessments, and by year 7, you'll then put into either the stream for, I guess, lower trades, so painters, brickies. So then there's a stream that ends at year 10, which is for standard trades, and then only about 30% go into the stream where you can then complete your HSC.
Yeah.
And so you end up with a sort of rather select group of people throughout your education journey, and high school is often where it's at, just from a sort of finding your own identity and perspective. And so I'd sort of, I guess, at that stage only mingled with a certain class of people. Not saying that in a nasty
Yeah, yeah,
way, but often enough they had parents who had nice jobs. And private schools, by the way, not really a thing in Germany.
yeah.
It's all state schools, but heavily streamed. So I guess I got to the end of high school, having had extensive exposure to a certain group of people.
Yeah, a little bubble.
And you could, I'm still very sensitive to accents, and
Yeah.
there's a lot you can figure out from an accent, as horrible as it sounds, especially over there. And there were certain accents where you know, okay, they went to that stream or that stream,
Yeah.
and certain stereotypes that came with it. And then here I was at sort of, I think I just turned 18. In the army, everyone had the same green stuff on. Everyone had the same haircut. Everyone had only slept 3 hours
Yeah.
last night. Yeah, there was no way for you to tell from sort of how they dressed, or you could tell it a bit from how they. But yeah, they were all buddies.
Yeah.
By the end of that, you'd all been thoroughly terrorized.
Flattens the class system out a bit.
Oh, absolutely. It would only be then, because we'd then on the weekends get time off, and everyone would sort of get into their normal civilian clobber and jump into their car and drive off to their girlfriend, and he's like, "Oh, well, you're one of them. You're actually a nice guy." So I guess I sort of went through a recalibration during that time in the army, where I sort of, um, I guess, realized that everybody's pretty similar.
Yeah.
Pretty similar, and that some of my perceptions have just been plain wrong.
Yeah.
And that was great. I enjoyed the military. You get to play around with a whole bunch of toys with your mates, and do cool things. We were heavily involved in training up the troops for Kosovo at that
Oh, right.
stage. So I spent about 5 months of my life ambushing troops in training. Um, and about 1 month of that was actually playing a driver who had an arm ripped off, and I had this little blood pump on my chest underneath my uniform. And as they tried to pull me out of the wreckage, I'd get to spray them and scream.
All good fun.
And the rest of the time, myself and one of my buddies would race around the airfield thrashing this little G-Class Mercedes battle wagon that we had. But they were great times, and I remember at the time thinking, man, this is a bit of a waste of my energy and time. And but then in hindsight, I sort of looked at it and went, that was actually really important to
Yeah.
have had that year of, I guess, for others it might be a gap year, but to have
Yeah.
had that year of just figuring out what I want to do. I got to mingle with a lot of the officers. Kind of again, when you're 18 and there's somebody who's 25 or 28 or 35, you're sort
Yeah.
of godlike, especially if they have ranks where you think, oh, that'd be fantastic. To have that much heft in the world. And anyway, so you get to mingle with those folks. And I remember one of them in particular, he was our squadron leader, and he had studied engineering, and I at the time didn't really know what I wanted to study. I kind of enjoyed playing Lego as a kid, but I kind of, nobody in our family had been an engineer.
Yeah.
We have plenty of doctors and lawyers, and anyway, he sort of said at some stage, Dorian, I think you would be a good engineer. You've got a good brain for it. I sort of remembered enjoying maths at school and science, and thought, oh, maybe I'll give it a
crack.
go. And
Yeah.
I guess just because I admired him as a man, I thought, oh, okay, if I end up a bit like that, fantastic. I'll do engineering, and
Yeah.
then I think it's always good to bolt a bit of business onto
Mm.
anything. And so that's how that happened. Again, a contact in a way, also
Yeah.
an influencer.
Definitely. And I think that's kind of the point I was going to, as as ambitious as you can be, like a lot of people just like rush into things and they're just like so focused on like hustle, hustle, hustle. But like that's why I wanted to understand like how important these kind of outside of the usual career trajectory were for you, because for me it's like a good reset, and it again, you meet people who you would never even expect and can steer your journey in different ways. So I'm glad that you thought it was as useful as it was for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think often enough, the most important influences in your life in hindsight are people that have randomly come
Yeah,
into your life through relative coincidence.
yeah,
Um, or their extended family members. And often it's a little steer from the side that sort of puts you onto a trajectory where you then in hindsight go, oh, they were the reason why this
yeah.
happened. They'll probably never know. Um, but they were the reason, and it was really important for me that they were there at that point in time. And if it had been um, somebody else, I might be in a very, very different place right now.
Exactly, exactly. Everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
And I suppose kind of turning back to your career and what you're doing now, I want to understand, given that you've worked across a lot of different industries and you've done a lot of, analytical and consumer research for a lot of different companies, a lot of our listeners are business owners or entrepreneurs. What are some of the key lessons which you think span across all industries that, our listeners could put into play?
Um, yeah, I guess one thing, and it'll have many businesses cringe, but also nod, business owners. Um, Reflecting on the many different industries I
Mm,
worked across, and on the surface, really disparate
yeah,
businesses, you find some really common themes throughout. So it's um, really easy to think that you're Robinson Crusoe in your kind of journey with your company. Often enough, though, um, once you lift the hood and see what's under this
yeah.
chassis or that chassis or
Same
whatever,
old, same old.
it's similar.
Yeah.
It certainly rhymes. Um, and so, what are those common themes? And on the one hand, if I just go through what I peddled for a long time as a consultancy, pricing is one of the disciplines that have across the board done badly.
Mm.
There's not a lot of sophistication. People tend to experiment and just think, oh, I'll give it a crack. Over the years, often enough, they don't move their prices
Mm.
much.
Yeah.
And part of that, and terrible to say, but it's fear. It's fear of your price dropping off a cliff and demand. Oh well, your price being too high, demand dropping off a cliff and losing a whole bunch of business, and then losing your job, right? And that's really understandable. So a lot of what we do is give executives the confidence to increase their prices by applying sophisticated science and giving them the feeling that the weight of public value perception
Yeah.
is behind them and that they can do it. And again, often enough, pricing is set as a function of what you feel you could charge above your cost price, cost plus
Yeah.
analysis. Um, you know, the far better way to look at that proposition, though, is what are people prepared to pay for this? Right? It sounds very, very intuitive,
Yeah.
but it's rather rare that we see that in practice. So that is a value lever, super important. And if we just go through a quick little mental example, let's say that you're selling your product for $1 and you have a 10% margin on that. So do the math,
Yeah.
about 10 cents in profit. Let's say you increase your price to $1.10. Well, you doubled your profit.
Yeah.
It's all top line growth. Um, now, often enough, we found that you can increase your prices by 50-60% without
Wow.
without losing much demand at all. Sometimes we find that dropping prices will be the best choice. It's much rarer though.
Yeah.
So if you had to flip a coin, always
Increase
increase
your
it.
price.
We're also able to, in our experiments, simulate prices that are well beyond what you'll feel comfortable with experimenting with in real life, and then model what demand would look like at
Yeah.
those price points, and
Yeah.
that's rather unique. The other one is competitive positioning. So we do a lot of competitive positioning work, and often enough, you find that the competitive set is not that huge, right? And you can get a good understanding using the right methods, what drives value for customers and why they go with certain competitors of yours. And if you can reverse engineer that and have a look at how you can essentially provide what customers see as particularly valuable, change public perception that you're actually the outfit aligned with that value driver, you can rob out their profit pools without them ever noticing. So that's another beautiful lever to be deployed. Of course, you nuance that for each business, but the strategies and techniques and methodologies we deploy are the same. And then there's sort of broadly, and this, every business owner can relate to it, keeping your customers happy. We do plenty of net promoter score programs and customer satisfaction programs, and you really can't do enough there. And the payback is more long term, but the old adage, it's a lot easier to keep a customer than it is to get a new one. A lot cheaper to keep them as well. So putting those programs in place, very important. But I guess sort of as a key kind of takeaway, I think often enough business owners are stuck working in the business, not on the business, and they're hustling. They're worrying about where the next order is going to come from, and then there's some blow up in HR, and they're sort of firefighting on all sorts of fronts. And so it's often helpful to get outsiders in who can sort of reassess the situation independently with a niche expertise, and help you see the
look more strategically.
Exactly. See the trees, not just the forest.
And I suppose like with AI developing a lot, and there's a big push for data. Where do you kind of see the future going? What's something you're excited about?
Yeah, I think as you can see by the redundancies from all the top 4 consultancies. I think that a lot of professional services could become redundant in future. No doubt there. And I think the biggest risk is for young folks coming out of universities now. So if I reflect on, we use a lot of AI within the business to great effect, and it's essentially an efficiency optimizer. What would have taken an analyst 2-3 days, the right ChatGPT prompts can get you well on the way. You still need an expert eye, but it can get you well on the way. So the problem I see is for kids coming out of university, and it's back to that disconnect between university and industry. I think that they're still learning things at university which are now eminently ChatGPT-able. Right, so they're then being thrown into this sort of new world that they're in touch with, but they've just spent 4 years of their life diddling around in circles, writing essays, which is now in many ways a redundant skill.
They haven't been trained on the tools.
They haven't been trained on the tools. So I think, and it's our ethos as well within the company, just embrace those tools and see it as kind of armor and weaponry that you can put on. Just fill your boots. Use whatever you can get there, because it is definitely the way of the future, and it is a huge efficiency booster. So I think for a lot of companies initially they were unsure and worried about privacy, and now you can see more of them lifting down, and at the same time you see a lot of redundancy. So on the one hand, a lot of grad programs are stalling. And I think that's a problem, especially for the grads. Maybe less for the companies, because they now have AI, right? Then you can also, on the other end, see a lot of expensive senior management being booted out. So if we just have a look at the recent ANZ clean out, 10% of the workforce gone overnight, or Telstra went through that, and PwC sacked a good 10% of their partners. We can see it's underway. Now, as little guys, though, therein lies the opportunity, because you can disrupt, and it's going to be very hard for the big players to shift their whole business model to something different. So if we just take a big 4 consultancy, their whole business model is focused on finding young bright graduates, working them hard for 4 or 5 years, slowly trickling them a little bit more money and a
drip feed.
drip feed. They're in the sausage factory. They're looking to build their CV, which is fantastic. And then promote some up to senior consultant, and all the way up to manager with great attrition, right? But now the problem is that broadly they're never really getting a look in, as in the grad programs are stalling. They're also struggling to reinvent themselves in this space. They have these overheads. They still have layers of bureaucracy and layers of management, expensive management, which they need to keep going. And they're reticent to move away from their business model of essentially arbitrage on young grads and selling that time.
It's a labor arbitrage.
It's a labor arbitrage, exactly. So I think that the opportunity, if we're just thinking about consulting, obviously lies in building technology that does what analysts did. And that's something that we've really focused on. And we build a lot of technology. We don't hire a lot of analysts. And it goes back to your earlier question of, are there learnings that you can make within businesses or common themes? And if you have common themes, pretty quickly you can always solve the same sort of problems in the same sort of way. And you get to a stage where you can essentially routinize large swathes of a consulting project. And that's a really exciting space. Again, as a small consultancy, you can quickly adapt and adopt new technologies. And I think for the consulting space, that's a bit of the way of the future. A few smart guys with strategy and methods knowledge. A bit of good machinery, and you can do a lot of damage.
100%. I suppose we've talked a lot about your kind of career and the work you do, but I know you're also quite a family man as well, and that kind of links into your definition of success. I want to understand how you balance the two. Being obviously a business owner and operator, and then still finding time to go kayaking and look after your kids and all that.
Yeah, really important. And I try not to fail too much. And I have a 7-year-old boy, a 2-year-old girl, and a third little boy underway. And it does recalibrate how you think about the world in many ways. I think on the one hand, you look at the world in a far more engaged way, and you really think, oh, this is a world that I'm leaving behind, and how in this small window of opportunity that I have, how can I shape the world to be as good as it could possibly be for my kids? Now there are some things that are within your control and some things that are outside of your control, and I think it's really important to draw that line. So by watching more of the news and getting angry about it, I don't think that's how you're actively going to shape life for your kids. I think one of the most valuable things you can give to your kids, it's as good an education as you can possibly afford. And that for me has unlocked a lot of opportunities. And even though I've harped on about the disconnect between universities and the real world, I think that giving them a good education, and again, I'd sort of, within good education, I think it's really important that it's an education that adopts new technologies. And we're constantly with our kids looking, especially the older one, looking at ways to have him engage with AI. And there's great courses out there that basically help kids understand the world in a better way. I mean, Musk has done a great job of creating curriculums that really gel with kids because they break down information in a different way. If we think about the discipline of mathematics, it's one that's taught in a very abstract way at school, often by a somewhat burnt out teacher. But those courses are just fantastic, and I can see just leaps and bounds and in the way that he's absorbing the information. Besides school, and I think that school is very important from a social perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
Again, I'm no proponent of just homeschooling. Now, as to hobbies and I think for me as a guy who at least spent his early childhood in the country, I'd like to enable them as kids who grow up in the city to see a bit of the country. to get out there and know what it feels like to dig a worm out of the ground, put it on a hook, and to, scorch yourself on a fire. And I think they're things that are close to my heart, and I'd like to pass that on. And depending on the kids, some love it, some don't. Some like horse riding, some don't. So I think that within your own sphere of influence, you can try to do things that you enjoy, and in part that'll gel with them, and in part it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you just I'm not one for pushing, and there are certain sports I enjoy, and you can sort of introduce them to them and hope that they like it. But if they say, "Dad, I really don't like it,"
it's all about exposure.
That's right. Then you sort of, I think, have to let go, and not follow your own ambitions there, but really look for things that they enjoy, and often enough that can come. And as I was saying earlier on, influences and direction often comes from places other than parents. It's a wonderful coincidence if he enjoys what I enjoy, or she enjoys what I enjoy. But at the same time, introducing them to plenty of opportunities to experience things outside of your direct sphere of perception, I think is really important. So we often try to encourage, and especially with our boy, get him to go to extracurriculars that we may not have really enjoyed as kids. I mean, interesting example for our boy, he loves chess. So we've got him in a chess club, and he's absolutely. I mean, I kind of enjoyed playing chess with my sister. She usually won. I cried, but he loves it. He loves speech and drama. He really enjoys riding his bicycle. He really enjoys swimming. I enjoyed swimming, so I can still relate to that one. I enjoyed bicycles, but the other two I would have never even thought of it. Right? I would say, no. Man, why do you want to do that? But I
leave yourself out of it. And just
what I typically say to my wife is, look, if he wants to go to the ballet, I have to be fine with that. He goes to the ballet. I really don't want my stereotypes to carry across. Or just if he expresses interest in something, let's try to encourage that. The other day he said he wants to play water polo. Fine,
give it a crack.
Let's throw him in there. See whether he likes being scratched underwater.
It probably goes back to your kind of whole ethos around just like putting yourself in different opportunities and different experiences, and seeing what comes of it.
And the nice. This is actually from a wonderful American academic who I met at a conference once, and he said, "Look, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Some things will stick, most of it will flake off, and then you just focus on what sticks." And so we've taken the approach of, just try stuff. Go for it. Figuring out what you don't like is just as important as figuring out what you do like. And that contrast between figuring out, this is great, the sun's shining here for me. I'm just naturally good at this, and you'll just naturally gravitate towards that. But to have that contrast, you also need to have experienced a bunch of stuff that you don't like.
Absolutely.
And I find that often enough there's an idea, I want to do this or I want to do that. What I typically say is, look, do it, we'll sign you up, but you're going to have to go there for the whole duration of the course, right? You're going to have to rub your nose in it.
If you're going to give it a crack, you've got to give it a good crack.
That's right. There's no getting out of this easily. I think that's a really important part.
100%.
And so I try to enable. And there's this old family saying, Mum would always say it when we were kids as well, that kids are a lot like a bow and arrow. All you can do is draw the bow and let go. And then once you let go, it's going to fly where you pointed it to. Maybe it might be deflected, but it's out of your hands. At that stage, you have to let go.
Focus on the things you can control.
Focus on the things that you can control.
And I suppose, as a dad and as a leader in your field, what's your legacy? How do you want to be remembered?
That's an interesting one. I mean, I don't at all have ambitions to have a building named after myself, or, if I think about my gravestone, something hidden, and I don't want anything polished in. I just a little rock somewhere, and
Under an old oak tree on the hill.
that's right. That's right. So um, I don't have broader societal ambitions
Yeah.
for my legacy. What I'd like to be able to tell myself as I lie on my deathbed, and this is something I often tell myself as
Yeah.
well. I'd like to be able to tell myself that I did my very best.
Yeah.
And that very best in some instances might not be enough. It might not be good enough. People might look at it in hindsight and go, "Oh, geez, man, what was he on about?" But if I can tell myself I did my best,
Yeah.
that's hugely valuable to me. If I can look at my kids and, independent of what they've done in their life, know that, given what I had then at that point in time when I was trying to go through the millions of decisions you make on the regular, if I can tell myself I did my best, that to me is winning.
Yeah.
And so, as to how would I like to be remembered, I'd like people to go, Dorian, nice guy, he did his very best.
I love that. That's such a wholesome legacy. And I suppose to wrap this conversation up, looking back on your journey and what you just mentioned, and your definition of success being all about happiness, do you feel successful?
Feel happy. I do.
Yeah.
I genuinely feel happy.
That's good. Dorian, thank you so much for this. It's been such a cool conversation. I mean, I felt like I knew you, but this has taken to a whole nother level, and there's definitely been a lot of takeaways. But I've tried to jot down what I think are like the key traits which have led you to what I would say is a pretty successful life and built your happy life. The first one is you very much follow your interests. You kind of just like put yourself out there and see where the opportunities arise, and I think not overthinking too much and just like putting yourself in those situations is super valuable.
Sometimes you have to jump into that van.
Exactly. You've got to jump into the van and jumping at those opportunities. So not just putting yourself in the right place for those opportunities to arise, but jumping on that bull and grabbing it by the horns and going all in on those things. When you got introduced to the guy at the Australian, he only reached out because you had started to build somewhat of credibility at the university and trying to connect with industry. You put yourself in that situation, and then you went out and took on that opportunity. And then the last one I've got is you're very relationship driven. You're incredible at building relationships and maintaining them and curating them as well. There's a Stephen Covey quote that I like a lot, and it's all about the emotional bank account. And relationships are very much like a bank account where you've got to invest time and invest, which is something I think you do exceptionally well. As you mentioned, you're very generous with your time. We've had plenty of sessions here in the office where you've been giving me advice, and I really really appreciate that. And it's something where
a simple one there is always try to give more than you take.
Yeah.
If you stick to that, you'll be fine.
And that's the kind of core essence of the emotional bank account.
Yep.
Is you want to invest as much as you can, so the balance goes up, so that when the time comes and you need something, there's you've got a little bit of leeway there, but you always want it to be in the green, right? So those are the kind of core traits which I think have led to your successful life, and I'm really glad that we got to sit down and have this chat.
No, thank you, Dylan. I guess thanks for the lovely interview. Really enjoyed it, and love watching your podcasts. On the other hand, you're a bright young man who, when I pulled over on the side of the road in my van, said, "Hey, do you want to get in?"
There was no sense of stranger danger.
That's right.
I jumped in.
You jumped in. Thanks a lot, and I think it's really exciting what you're doing here, and keep it up. Love it.
Thanks, Dorian. And for those who have listened today, if you've gotten something out of today's episode, it would mean the world if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Helps us spread the message with other listeners. And you can see all of our inspirational content over on our website, thequestforsuccesspodcast.com. And with that, we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening.